Let me be personal and theological again, this time with Reverend Phil Jackson, a young pastor from Chicago who I talked to earlier this week. I thought Phil Jackson was the coach of the Chicago Bulls, not a Chicago pastor. He did create the triangle offense. Triangle, Trinity. See where I'm going there? See what I did?
I see. Yeah.
Bringing you law, gospel, and guns. Welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio.
Hi folks, welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio, a show about guns, hunting, competitive shooting, the natural right of self-defense, and what God's Word says about the issues surrounding gun rights and gun ownership. I'm your host, Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran, and this is episode number 133, brought to you by Cooke's Holsters, American-made custom Kydex holsters with a lifetime warranty and a 100% satisfaction guarantee. Check them out at cooksholsters.com. So, how was your week? Mine was busy. Planning for a new project you'll be hearing more about in the coming weeks. Busy week at work. And an interview, which you'll be hearing today. We have a rifle shooting tip from Mia in the show today. My wife was at a concert this weekend, and so I thought we would re-air, as Aaron is on the road for work, I thought I would re-air an old tip of his from episode 90 about personal safety while attending concerts. Sergeant Bill is still adjusting to his new work schedule, so he's not going to be with us this week. Pastor Bennett is busy with all kinds of stuff with his kids this week, but I've got an interview with a special guest, Matt Disher, who happens to be a confessional Lutheran and the host of American Guns, a proud member of the Self-Defense Radio Network. He's going to be joining me later in the show. But first, I really struggled with what to talk about at the open of today's show. One story, though, just keeps coming back to me over and over. It's a story I saw on Facebook and a couple of other places about two young Americans who left their regular humdrum day-to-day lives in search of adventure, and unfortunately, they lost their lives in Tajikistan. Now, while Snopes, as one would expect, tried to pour cold water on the story as it was making the rounds in conservative social media because of the way these two unfortunate individuals are portrayed, there's no doubt that at its core, this story is true. The facts are unavoidable. Two young Americans, they tried to get away from their humdrum 9-to-5 lives, and they decided they were going to go see the world. And they experienced the world in a way that many of us only have experienced through television. Up close, personal, and dirty, they experienced the wonder and diversity of human culture in a way that watching a special on television can really never correctly convey. Along the way, they were amazed by the kindness and hospitality that they found from people from countries and cultures that are 180 degrees different from our culture, our country here in the U.S. And they were amazed to find in the third world something vastly different from the way that world is typically portrayed in the media, as the president impolitely described it as an S-hole. And that realization blinded them to a very real and deadly truth. One of the two, Jay Austin, wrote in his blog, and I quote, "You watch the news and you read the papers, and you're led to believe that the world is a big, scary place. People, the narrative goes, are not to be trusted. People are bad. People are evil. People are axe murderers and monsters and worse. I don't buy it. Evil is a make-believe concept that we've invented to deal with the complexities of fellow humans holding values and beliefs and perspectives different than our own. It's easier to dismiss an opinion as abhorrent than to strive to understand it. Badness exists, sure, but even that is quite rare. By and large, humans are kind. self-interested sometimes, myopic sometimes, but kind, generous and wonderful and kind. No greater revelation has come from our journey than this." End quote. Evil is a make-believe concept. That's where the story takes a tragic turn. The couple were cycling through a part of Tajikistan, which we now know is controlled by ISIS. Not the whole country, but the part of the country that they were cycling through. They were accompanied by 3 others from Sweden when a car passed them on the road, circled around, sped up, and then ran through them, knocking them from their bikes. The driver then stopped, got out of his car, and proceeded to stab all of the cyclists as they lay in the road injured. And 4 of those 5 people, including both Americans, are dead. The make-believe concept ran them over and knifed them both to death. Have you ever seen the movie The Usual Suspects? There's a cripple, a character named Verbal Kent, played by Kevin Spacey, who weaves an intricate tale to deceive authorities who are trying to solve this mass murder. Kent tells a series of half-truths mixed with some familiar stories to paint a picture of this sinister and secretive underworld character, Kaiser Soze, about whom very little is known, only rumors and scary bedtime stories that street criminals tell each other about a shadowy figure who you dare not cross. And at one point, Verbal, a stuttering cripple that nobody suspects is involved in this mass murder because of his assumed disabilities. He says the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist. That may be a line from a movie, but there's a lot of truth to it. That trick is at the heart of this tragic story in Tajikistan, because as simplistic as the late Mr. Austen may have thought it to be, evil really does exist, and you don't have to look to the third world to find it. There's a natural desire to see goodness in others, to believe that men are basically good and that they only make bad choices, and that if we can control those choices, there simply will be no more bad things. Look no further than the temperance movement, which sought to control bad choices when it pushed prohibition of alcohol, or the anti-drug movement and its just say no slogans, or the open borders movement that sees the immigrant as a basically good person who just wants to improve their lives. The anti-smoking crusades of the 1990s that ultimately made social pariahs out of smokers and cynically funded government programs with increased cigarette taxes while claiming to want fewer people to smoke. The resurgent support for socialism, because we can't trust true capitalists or entrepreneurs to do what's best for other people. Or the modern free speech movement, which actually seeks to silence the voices that they object to. And of course, there's gun control. If only we can get rid of those scary guns, our kids will be safe. The problem with all of those ideas, aside from the fact that all of them are manifest failures, is they ignore the basic fundamental truth of original sin and the existence of evil. Since the fall of Adam, all who are born with sin. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. But Satan, the deceiver, has convinced men that there is no God. There is no good, there's no evil, just what you deem to be good or evil yourself. And since there's no objective morality based on the law of a just and righteous God, right and wrong are based entirely on our own ideas, whatever society deems to be good or bad. That's how you come to the conclusion that by and large, people are kind, generous, and wonderful. Were that the case, there would be no school shootings. There would be no ISIS to stab these people to death. No Al-Qaeda, no 9/11. There would be no Me Too movement, no church sexual abuse scandals. Roman Polanski wouldn't be a scumbag. Hillary Clinton wouldn't be a lying, self-serving hag. Bill Clinton and Donald Trump would not be serial philanderers. There would be no child rapists, no human trafficking, no serial killer, no war, no need for police or armies or weapons. It would be heaven on earth. But that's not reality. Mankind is wicked and sinful from birth. We're born into sin and the natural inclination to cheat and to steal and to lie and to fornicate and to murder. The story of mankind's treatment of our fellow man is not one of kindness and generosity. It's one of centuries of war and torture and hatred and cruelty. To the extent that men are generous and wonderful and kind, that's a historical aberration. Being a Christian doesn't mean that we're free from those sins either. It just means that we have a Redeemer who died for them so that we might have eternal life. It means we recognize the existence of evil and sin. We recognize that we've got to be watchful because the devil prowls around like a roaring lion seeking to devour us, whether it's in the wilds of Tajikistan or right here in our own cities and towns here in America. We'll be right back with more. Mia Anstein kicks us off right after this message. You're listening to Armed Lutheran Radio on the Self-Defense Radio Network. Check out all the great content at sdrn.us.
Hey guys, it's Mia here. If you follow me on social media, you know that I often share morning inspiration. Many people ask how I can keep this up every day. Well, it starts with my morning readings and that perfect cup of coffee. The official Dunkin' Donuts shop provides coffee lovers with everything they need, from K-Cup pods, original blended coffee, tea, drinkware, and more. Who doesn't want Dunkin' delivered to their front door? Shop today at www.armedlutheran.us/coffee and help support Armed Lutheran Radio today.
Hey, if you're like me, you like shopping at gun shows. No pressure from sales staff, no need to bother them to ask to look at stuff. You just pick stuff up and dry fire it and look at it and hold it. Imagine if you could get that experience at your local gun store, where you don't need to bother anybody. You don't have to ask people for help if you don't need it. You don't have salespeople hovering over your shoulders. Well, this is what it's like when you shop at G4G Guns. Cassie and Patrick Coburn are the owners, and you've heard them on the program before. They are absolutely awesome people, and they'll help you find exactly the right gear for you. But there's no sales pressure. You just browse the store, you pick up and hold anything that you want to look at without asking permission, just like at the gun show. And once you've found the gun you want, or if you actually do need assistance, Patrick and Cassie are there to help. It's the best of both worlds, gun shop and gun show, in one place. It really is the best. G4G Guns. They're located at 2035 Central Circle, Suite 108 in McKinney, Texas. They're open Mondays from 1 to 6, Tuesday through Thursday 11 to 7, and on the weekends you'll find them at a gun show near you. Or check them out online at G4G Guns. That's G, the number 4, G, guns.com. G4G Guns, the gallery for great guns. G4GGuns.com.
Up next, it's Mia's Motivations with Mia Anstein.
Hey guys, last week we took a little break from the hunting preparations, but I wanted to get back to that since we are approaching hunting season so quickly. And we've talked about techniques to shoot better. We've talked about ways to reduce shooting flinch. We've talked about muzzle brakes. But now today I want to talk to you about how to zero your rifle scope. This is so important, and you have to always do this before you hunt, and especially if you travel, even if you carry your gun in a hard case, you need to sight in your rifle again after you get to your destination for your hunt. The other day, a friend came over to sight in his new rifle and scope, and I happened to have been really busy with work, and since sighting in really should take no time at all, I figured I would just not pack up my work, and I would let him and my husband head down to the range to get things dialed in. After a few hours and numerous boxes of ammunition, the shots were still not in a tight group on target. So refer back to how to get those groupings tight, and you may find a couple of clues as to what the problem was. But sighting in really should not be this difficult. Aside from a gusty, windy day or a loose, defective scope, the only thing that would cause a poor shot grouping is the shooter. And the day was not windy or gusty. So Let me share a quick way to get your crosshairs on target that requires minimal shots fired. First of all, you need your rifle with a properly mounted scope, a shooting bench, and a rest. I use a Caldwell lead sled, 1 box of ammunition, and you want to make sure that you use the grade that you intend to hunt with, or if you're competing, use the grade that you're going to compete with. Make sure it matches. You're going to need paper targets pinned up downrange. You need a binocular or spotting scope, and you don't have to have a friend go with you, but it's nice to have a friend so they can be watching the target while you're paying attention to your shooting technique. And always remember to follow the safety rules when you are handling firearms. I always recommend zeroing your hunting rifle at 200 yards. This distance can be adjusted according to your preference, as well as the velocity and drop that you're going to get from the ammunition that you're shooting. So make sure that you start with a sturdy shooting bench and that rest, and make sure it's seated squarely upon it. You don't want your lead sled rocking on your shooting bench, so make sure that's stable. Place your rifle securely in the shooting bench and load 1 cartridge into the chamber. Place the crosshairs directly on the center of the bullseye and make sure that your scope is level. Make sure that you're not off kilter, because a cant in the rifle will affect how the bullet goes down range. So make sure that that's level and fire 1 shot. Use your binoculars or spotting scope and check the location of impact on the target. If the impact is 3 inches high and 5 inches right, make a note of that either mentally, or if you have a notepad, write that down. Somehow remember where it hit. Repeat the shot again. Shoot exactly the same, and you want to do this for accuracy purposes. Find your shot grouping. You've got to have a good group to start moving those crosshairs. For that second shot, make sure that you're securely in the rest again. Fire around at the bullseye. If the second shot hits in the same area and you've got a good shot grouping with those 2 bullets, then you're ready to adjust. If not, you need to continue the process of aiming at the bullseye. Always aim at the bullseye. You don't want to try to adjust your aim because of where the bullet hit. You want to always aim at the bullseye. If you cannot determine a good shot grouping, clear the gun and head back to the shop to double check your scope. Once you have a good shot grouping, this is where a friend can come in handy. First, remove the adjustment covers on the scope, and with the rifle still in the rest, look through the scope and place the crosshairs on the holes where you have shot in the target. In this case, we're looking at approximately 3 inches high and 5 inches right. As you peer through the scope at the 2 holes on the target where your grouping is, have your friend move the windage and elevation adjustments for you. You're going to want to move them down and to the left until your crosshairs come back to the bullseye. Do not move the rifle during this process. Keep looking down the scope and adjust those adjustments. Click, click, click. The dials on the turrets show the direction that you're moving the bullet's impact, so follow those on those turrets. Now your scope's crosshairs are on the bullseye. You will need to chamber another round and fire downrange. Do this twice to double check for accuracy, but you should be dialed in and good to go for the hunt. If all goes well, you are looking at 4 shots fired. You may want to or need to fire additional rounds downrange just for fine-tuning, but now that's how you do a quick, easy sight in, and you save a lot of money on ammunition. As I mentioned, remember to sight in again when you get to your destination. Have a great one, guys. Talk to you next week.
You can read more from Mia and watch her YouTube videos at miaanstein.com.
Let me take a moment to tell you about our membership site, the Reformation Gun Club. Members get exclusive content, all the segments, full-length interviews, full-length episodes of Clinging to God and Guns with extra content not released previously. They're kind of like the movies with the extended cuts or the director's cuts. Oftentimes what we have to do is trim those segments down so we can fit them into a reasonable time in the show, and that means extra content for you as a member of the Reformation Gun Club. You get access to our closed Facebook group, discounts from our partners like Gunbox Gun Safes, Easy to See Targets, Daltech Force, Cooke's Holsters, Talon Gun Grips, Inline Fabrication, much more. So go check it out on Patreon. We've moved to Patreon. Registration is much easier. You get your own unique RSS feed, which means you can paste that into your favorite podcast app and take it with you and listen anywhere. For as little as $2 a month, you can take advantage of all of those benefits and help support the show. Visit patreon.com/armedlutheran or go to gunclub.armedlutheran.us and sign up today.
It's time for this week's self-defense tip from Aaron Israel of Fundamental Defense.
Hey folks, this is Aaron Israel with Fundamental Defense here with your personal defense tip of the week. This week I want to talk to you about concert safety or any outdoor music festival type event. First off, if you're planning on going to an outdoor concert festival, I would be very cautious about going to one of those if it's in an unsecure area that's surrounded by buildings that are unsecure like you saw in Las Vegas. They may have patted people down and done the normal concert security when the people walked into the festival, but obviously all the buildings surrounding the area were not secure, which is where the shooter was able to find a perch and do what he did on Sunday. So I would generally avoid going to that sort of a concert because you're just in an unsecure area, you're fish in a barrel, so to speak, and it's a very soft target, and this is not the last time we're going to see something like this take place. It's now rumored that the guy had hotel rooms that he had purchased at Lollapalooza and some other country music festivals where he was possibly scoping out the possibility of committing this mass murder, and so these are things that could be copied in the future and are a known terrorist TTP to begin with to do things like this. Even if it's not shooting, it could be a bomb exploding, something like that. If it's an unsecure area that's a big mass of people, I would stay out of it as a general rule. But obviously, we're still going to go to concerts. I went to a concert this summer to go see Metallica, and so you shouldn't just stop living your life just because there's a potential terrorist threat. So here's some things to think about if you are going to go to a concert. First off, make sure it's at a well-secured area. Like I went to a concert at the Cowboy Stadium, Jerry World, and it's a very secure area. They have very thorough pat-downs with metal detectors and SWAT and police all over the place, and it's a very secure area. Now, that's not to say that you couldn't penetrate that security if you wanted to, but it's better than just a big open outdoor venue where they're not doing anything. As you're walking up to the concert venue from your vehicle, I would set a rally point somewhere outside. If you've got a restaurant that you're passing by or some kind of a really obvious landmark, I would set a rally point. And a rally point means you tell whoever's in your group, hey, this is where we're going to meet up if we get separated. So if something goes down and we can't find each other, this is where we're going to meet up after the smoke clears, so to speak. There are a lot of stories coming out of the Vegas massacre of people being separated from their loved ones in the chaos of trying to get out of there and then having to try to find each other afterwards. And cell service is not something that you can count on after a mass casualty event like this. A lot of times it ties up the cell networks. You're not able to get text messages and calls through. So setting that rally point and knowing where you're going to meet up after all things are said and done is going to be a really smart thing so that you can find your loved ones if you get separated. The next thing, go in early. Don't get stuck in a big mass of people trying to get into the venue. That's where you're most vulnerable, is when you're in those big masses of people. So get there early and go in when there's not huge lines so that you can get through security quickly and you're not caught in that big cluster of people out in front of whatever the venue is. Same thing when you're leaving. Wait till after the crowd has cleared before you decide to go ahead and exit the venue. If you think about the Ariana Grande shooting in London earlier this year, they were targeted as they were leaving in that big mass of people. So don't get caught in that mass of people leaving or entering the stadium, and you're going to lower your risk by doing that. So try to stay out of those big clusters. And right off of that, when you're inside the concert venue, I'm going to tell you, don't pick a seat that's going to put you in the center of the crowd of people. Don't be in the mosh pit. Don't be right in front of the stage, right next to the barricade. I know those are good places to watch the music if you want to get close to your favorite star, but from a personal defense perspective, that's the last place you want to be. Pick your seats by an exit if you can, or if your seats are not right by the exit, identify where the exit is and have a plan for how you're going to be able to get to that exit and what the quickest route of escape would be if you needed to get out of there quickly. When I was at the Metallica concert this summer, I had floor seats, which would have allowed me the opportunity to go into the mosh pit area and do all that if I wanted to, but instead I positioned myself close to an exit where I had an easy way to get out if I needed to. The exit was about 15 feet away from me, and I would have had a real easy avenue of egress if I needed to get out of that building. So place yourself close to an exit if you can, and if not, know how you're going to get to that exit if you need to get out quickly. The next thing, identify points of cover in your general vicinity. One of the only things you could really do in this Vegas shooting was find some cover and get behind it, and then wait for your opportunity when the gunshot stopped to get out of Dodge. So identify those pieces of cover ahead of time. You're looking for something that's a heavy steel girder or something like that. A lot of these stage equipment pieces have big steel pieces around them. There were some at the Metallica concert that I could have easily jumped behind. The barricades that they use around the stage could be good things for cover. Sometimes the vendors' areas have real solid pieces of metal around them. Identify that stuff ahead of time and know if I had to get behind cover, here's where I would go. Because if you're in a situation like you found in the Vegas shooting, then that's going to be one of the only things you can do, and you want to have that cover ID'd ahead of time. The next thing is the obvious thing that I preach about a lot on this program is carry enough medical kit for yourself and your loved ones. You ought to have at least one tourniquet, one Israeli bandage, or something similar, a compression bandage, and one quick clot item per person. So look at the Dark Angel medical kits on darkangelmedical.com. They've got pocket kits that have all of those things in them. You ought to have one on your person. Your wife ought to have one on her person. You ought to have enough for your kids and whoever else it is that you care about in your immediate vicinity, so that if you have to do self-care or render aid, nobody's coming to help you most likely in these situations. Medical care is not going to get there quickly, and it's a long ride to the hospital. So be able to have those things on your person and on your family members so that you can take care of each other in that situation, because it's going to be on you when things go down if they do. The last thing, you hear a lot of these situations, and Vegas was just another in a long string of them, where people say, I thought I heard fireworks and it turned out to be gunshot. It's never fireworks. If you hear gunshots and your brain says gunshots, don't sit around and wait to confirm whether they're fireworks or not. Get behind cover, start moving towards the exit, do what you need to do. Don't sit there and wait and see if they might be fireworks, because they almost never are. Trust your instincts. If you hear gunshots, react to the gunshots and start doing the things that you know you need to do, looking for cover and getting out of the building if you can. So that's my advice for you. Once again, I would avoid these outdoor music festivals where there's unsecure areas all around. These are just going to continue to be soft targets, as are concerts and big sporting events and things in general. Now, I'm not going to say don't go to any of them, and hopefully these tips will help to lower your risk if you do choose to partake in one of these public entertainment events, because I think we should continue on with our lives and do things that we like to do, even though there's a continued threat there. Just be smart, carry a kit, have a plan, and use these tips to help you lower your risk if you choose to partake in these activities. That's your personal defense tip for the week. Thanks for tuning in.
Aaron Israel is a Personal Defense Network contributor and owner of Fundamental Defense. You can find out more and sign up for any of Aaron's classes at fundamentaldefense.com.
Hey there, this is Sergeant Bill. After the successful completion of a match, Lloyd and I like to get together and top it off with a celebratory cigar. We get our post-match cigars from Cigar Page, home of America's best cigar deals. Visit armedlutheran.us/cigar and get a great deal, and also help support Armed Lutheran Radio.
All right, I want to take a minute here to thank our incredible sponsor, Cooke's Holsters. They have been with us from day one, when this show was just an idea, really, before we even started the podcast. And I was so impressed with Bob Cooke and his products that I signed up to become a dealer. I believe in the product so much, I wanted to sell it myself. Cooke's Holsters makes custom Kydex holsters for range work, for concealed carry, for competition, inside the waistband, outside the waistband, in a variety of colors and prints and mounting options. Check out the new series of patriotic printed Kydex holsters as well. Those are really cool. And you may be asking yourself, every time you hear me talk about Cooke's Holsters, well, what's the big deal? Why should I trust Cooke's Holsters when there are so many other Kydex holster makers out there? Listen, Cooke's makes the molds and sells printed Kydex that many of the other holster manufacturers actually use to build their holsters. This is a great company. This is a great product. They come with a lifetime warranty against defects, 100% satisfaction guarantee, or your money back. Check them out today at cooksholsters.com. Be sure to use the promo code ARMEDPODCAST, that's all one word, and save 10% off your order. Go to cooksholsters.com today. Welcome back to Armed Lutheran Radio. Today we are introducing you to another member of the Self-Defense Radio Network, a podcast that I was honored to be a guest on, episode number 10 back in January of this year. Matt Disher is the host of the American Guns podcast, and he joins us tonight. Matt, welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Lloyd. Thanks for having me.
You're from Ohio.
Right.
Originally from Ohio?
Yep. Born and raised in the Toledo area. Yeah, so Northwest Ohio.
When you first started out, at the time you were correct me if I'm wrong, you were in the public school system. You were teaching, is that right?
I was. So I graduated from Eastern Michigan University with a degree in teaching and was doing a lot of substitute teaching and stuff like that. And over the past year or two, I kind of realized that the job hunt was going to be a lot harder than I initially thought, and that the job itself was maybe not, I hate to say my calling, but maybe not what I really wanted to do. So actually, I don't know if we've talked about this, but I started a small business doing residential painting. That was in April of this year. So I've been doing that for a few months and had a lot of success, and I've really enjoyed it.
I know Ohio is not exactly an anti-gun state, but you've got teachers' unions that are typically not favorable to gun rights. What was it like being the gun guy in the public school system?
It's tough, and I've only really had one good experience with it. And this is something that a lot of people, because everyone talks about how, schools are really anti-gun. It's very, very true, but a lot of people haven't actually seen it because they're not in the schools. And the story that I always bring up is when I was actually doing my student teaching, I was at a public high school in Michigan. And one day during lunch in the teacher's lounge, all of us teachers were sitting around eating lunch, and someone brought up a hunting trip that they were talking about. And I just remember this feeling of awkwardness in the room, that everyone is, not wanting to jump in on this conversation as this one teacher was talking about this hunting trip. And then after he stopped telling his story, there was just this dead silence for what felt like a full minute, but it was probably more like 5 or 10 seconds. And then another teacher just kind of quietly said, "Yeah, I'm kind of into guns too." And then as soon as he said that, it was like a switch, and there was maybe 3 or 4 other teachers that were like, "Oh yeah, I grew up with guns, and I shot and stuff like that." And I remember it just making a huge impact on me, because I said, "Wow, like all these teachers have been teaching here for who knows how many years, and they've been coworkers for who knows how many years, and this just feels like the first time they've ever talked about this, and it feels like they were all afraid to show some support." And I remember thinking, "Oh my gosh, is this what it's going to be like wherever I end up teaching?" And it has kind of, but I think that there are maybe more teachers than we know of that, are not necessarily pro-gun. I mean, I'm sure there's a few, but at least not as crazy as some of the things we get from the left. So, but it is tough. It is tough. You kind of feel like you're the only one who, isn't left of Karl Marx when you're teaching, especially in a public school. So,
right. If everyone around you is so uncomfortable to talk about it, you have no idea how many other people who share your values are there, and everybody is sitting there on pins and needles thinking, "Oh, I hope I don't say the wrong thing." It's like Cheryl and Danny Todd from Gun Freedom Radio were on with me a couple of weeks ago, and Cheryl said something like, it's actually harder to come out as a gun rights supporter than it is to come out as homosexual nowadays. That it's almost like you're scared to death to even mention that, like you said, your friend's mentioning that he went on a hunting trip, and everybody was like, should I say something next, or should I just let that go?
Right. Yeah, it is. There's a lot of nerves, and I can understand it from the standpoint of, I understand why that's the case, because there is this feeling that everyone is so anti-gun. But I don't know. I mean, me personally, I also don't understand it, because it's like, well, I've always been such an advocate for the Second Amendment. So to me, it's just kind of like, well, I can't really keep myself from talking about it. Not that I'll be the guy that always has to talk about that one thing, but it's a huge part of what I believe. It's I'm very much a studier of the Constitution, and I really do believe in the right to keep and bear arms. So, I'm not going to shy away from it either. And
Right.
yeah, that was one of the things that was really making me nervous about, especially looking for a more permanent teaching position. Is just like, man, are my politics gonna affect that? And especially nowadays, with everyone running an internet search on your name when you apply for a job, it's like, are they going to search me, and up pops American Guns Podcast, and there's me giving all of my views, not holding back at all. Is that going to affect me finding a job? And I don't know. It probably definitely would have, but yeah, that's just unfortunately the state of the public school system.
So, did you grow up around guns? Where did the interest in the Second Amendment and gun rights come from?
I wouldn't say that I necessarily grew up around guns. I would say before I turned 18, my dad had maybe taken me and my brother to the range a few times. But that was really about it. I mean, he was always very much a supporter of the Second Amendment. But we really never, I guess, lived that out. We weren't active in politics. We weren't really getting a whole lot of experience with shooting and stuff like that. And then when I went to college, that's when it kind of really started making more sense to me. That's when I really developed this sense of, wow, everyone is so anti-gun. Why is that the case? Why am I seeing so much bias against the Second Amendment? Specifically. And I remember reading articles that my professors had published, because I was studying social studies education. So that's the kind of stuff you get, is all the social policy and stuff like that. Right. And I just remember being like, oh my gosh, like this stuff is just not lining up with the facts. It's not making any sense to me. I want to figure out what's true. And so it really wasn't as much an interest in guns as it was, I felt like I was being lied to, and I felt like I was being purposely manipulated into believing a certain thing. And that made me angry, and that made me push back against it. So it was almost more of this search for truth than it was, well, I've always been around guns, and so, I have that natural, push in that direction. So it really was more of an educational and philosophical love for me that I developed for the Constitution and for the Second Amendment. And then once that came around, then my love for guns and for shooting and learning all that stuff kind of came second.
Now, you are, interestingly enough, a confessional Lutheran like myself. LCMS?
Yep, LCMS.
So that makes 3 on the network. You and me and Mia Anstein.
That seems like a really high number for such a small group of people, because especially when you're a confessional Lutheran, it seems like there's not too many of them out there, but there are. Yeah, I was actually raised ELCA, mostly because my parents were, I would say, nominal Christians. They believed in God, but they just kind of had us going to church because they wanted us to turn into good people, whatever that means. And then when I got to college, man, college just seems to be the turning point for everything in my life. But when I got to college,
it's the turning point in a lot of people's lives. Yeah. It either turns you bad or turns you.
Yeah, it's that point where you decide, okay, well, I'm going to do what I'm going to do, and I need to figure out what I believe about everything. And so, yeah, that's what happened. When I got to college, I said, man, it's time for me to decide if I'm actually going to do this Christian thing or I'm not. And so I started really studying the Bible and getting involved in groups and stuff like that. And I started being like, man, this is what the LCA teaches over here. This is what I'm reading in my Bible over here. These two things don't look anything alike. And I was like, well, man, I got to figure out which denomination is right about, all this stuff. And, what do I believe? And it was actually Jonathan Fisk and Worldview Everlasting. He was a guest that I had on my show that kind of got me going in that direction. And then I said, wow, yeah, the the confessions, the actual Lutheran confessions are where it's at, and I felt I dealt with a lot of anger for a while because I was like, man, ELCA, they had me believing all this stuff. They used their name Lutheran, and they just don't hold to the confessions, and the services kind of look similar, but other than that, it's totally different.
Lutheran in air quotes.
Yeah, that's exactly right, and that's how I felt, and it's true.
So if you can keep up with Fisk, I had I'm older. I'm a lot older than you are. I had a hard time. I really like Fisk, but I had a hard time keeping up with him. It's kind of like watching Ben Shapiro talk, if Ben Shapiro talked Christian theology, it's so hard to keep up with him because his mind works so fast. I can't, I'm like, okay, slow down. Let's play this at like half speed so I can keep up with
that's how it was. I spent a lot of college nights in my dorm room with a notepad, me and my student and my teaching and all that, sitting there with my notepad and writing down, okay, he just gave me 5 terms I've never heard of. Let me write those down, pause the video, go Google those terms, so it's keeping up with it. It's a lot of like side research and stopping and coming back and, then kind of going through his videos, he'll do like, 4 videos on baptism. So it's like, okay, I went through all 4. Now I need to go back to 1 because I feel like I missed something. It's crazy. But that's how I feel like that's how I learn best is when someone is just dumping a lot of information on me because it gets me curious, right? So he's throwing out all these terms and it's like, oh man, what does that mean? And then I go look it up for myself, and that's how I've always really learned best. And that's how I've learned about firearms and stuff like that is, someone would be talking about this gun that they have and I'll be like, oh man, that sounds really awesome. So I'll go do some research on it. And that's just,
so you're comfortable drinking from the fire hose.
Yeah. Yep. That's how I prefer it. And it's frustrating at times, I will admit, but that's who I am.
Now do your confessional Lutheran, does that background your beliefs, how does that inform your position on gun rights?
When I made the switch to LCMS, and this obviously didn't happen right when I switched, but as I studied the Word of God a lot more, and as I've continued to develop my beliefs and try to align those as best I can with Scripture, it just became clear to me that the divide between, I wouldn't even just say LCMS, but the divide between Christians who believe that the Scripture is truth and Christians that don't want to water down the Scripture and those that do, is this idea of responsibility and also a belief that God is supreme. And so with both of those things, okay, so you can look at, for example, the topic of self-defense, so it's like, okay, I can say that people don't have a right to self-defense. Well, then when you have stories of, let's say a woman in an abusive relationship, you're also taking her gun away. And when you look at a story like that, it's like, man, is it really in line with Scripture to say that she can't defend herself because Jesus said, turn the other cheek? Like, is that really what he's talking about right there? Right. Or are we just taking words out of context and not taking our responsibility to really do the research and understand what's being said in the Word and apply that to everyday life? So I wouldn't say that it's been like a moment where it kind of like, it was like a switch where it's like, okay, this, my Second Amendment advocacy and my Christian beliefs kind of were made possible where they meshed together really well. It was just kind of a long development of principles such as responsibility and such as of respect for the Word of God and that it's inerrant. And then over time, that's just kind of been like, well, yeah, those two things do fit. And we do have a responsibility to protect ourselves, protect our families, protect our neighbor, and to not strip away the rights of our neighbor. It hasn't been hard to reconcile those two things at all.
Let's talk a little bit about the podcast. Where did you get the idea to start podcasting?
I've always been really into podcasts. I feel like every podcaster is also a lover of podcasts. And so I always thought, man, that would be really cool if I could have my own podcast or radio show or something like that where I could just talk about whatever. But I was like, man, I have no talent for that and I don't know what it would be about. And, there's all the excuses. And then I was reading an article, and this is really where my show was born. I was reading an article, and I don't remember what website it was. It was one of the, I don't know if it was like Every Town or Mom's Demand or, one of those groups. And it was talking about why we should ban muzzleloaders. And this article was, going through this whole explanation of how these muzzleloaders are so dangerous. They shoot a 50 caliber projectile. And I'm just reading this thing, and it is just blowing me away, because I am like, okay, not only is it stupid, anyone can call it stupid because it is. But I thought about it, and I said, this is the left's entire argument. This is what we always hear. We hear the Second Amendment was written in a time of muskets, not in a time of AR-15s. So that's what they say. And they say, they use that argument all the time. That's like their golden argument. And I said, and now here they're saying that muzzle loaders are too dangerous. It's like, no, no. Right. And so that's when I decided I needed to do something about it. I needed to, get my voice out there. I had this moment of inspiration where I'm like, I got to figure out what I'm going to do to combat this. And I know I can't combat this article specifically, but what can I do in a broader context? And I had some musical recording equipment around, and I said, hey, maybe I'll start a podcast. And my very first episode was actually about that article. And I'm sure if I go back, I haven't listened to my first couple episodes in a while, but I'm sure it was, Yep. It sounded like someone in their basement with terrible editing and, who knows what else. But it's been a fun journey since then. But yeah, that's how I got started, is someone on the left, whoever wrote that article, got me all riled up. So they're the reason that I'm here.
All right. So for people who have not heard the show, what are they in for? What can they expect with American Guns? What is the show like? And what kind of things do you do on the show that sets you apart from what makes American Guns special?
Well, what makes it special is I really wanted to, when I started the podcast, I really wanted to kind of stand out, because there's already a lot of firearm podcasts, and some of them get into really specific topics. And I said, well, I kind of want it to be just like all around entertainment. So I've tried to do all sorts of different things, and I still do. I dive really deep into Supreme Court cases that have to do with the Second Amendment. One of my favorite segments that we do is called A Tale of Idiocy, where we'll read a story about a stupid criminal, which I know sounds like common sense, but an especially stupid criminal. And then we'll, laugh at them and stuff like that. And that's all geared towards obviously reminding us that it's a good idea to carry a gun with you, because there's some stupid people out there.
Does Mr. Dude still join you for that segment?
Oh, Mr. Guy. No, he doesn't. Mr. Guy. He actually, it was funny. He actually dropped out. He sent me a message and said, hey man, the time commitment's just, I'm not going to be able to do it anymore. So I had to figure out a way to bring in a new co-host for that. So I made up some story about how he was off on a hunting trip and got eaten by a coyote or something. And now I got a new friend in here that does that with me. And gosh, we got to get one of those going soon, because it's been a while. But yeah, that's one of my favorite segments. Other than that, I do talk about the news as well. I try to not do that every single week, because anyone can do that, and you can get that anywhere else. And I'm sure that there's people that are way more informed on the news than me. So yeah, right. Those are just a few of the things that we do. A few range reports every now and then.
So it's basically the things that whatever grabs you that week, and you think, I want to talk about this. It whether it's the news or something that you do or a court case, it's really the things that grab your attention.
Yeah, and that's always been something that's really important to me, because if it's something that's grabbed my attention and it's something that I can't get my mind off of for that week, then I know I'm going to be passionate about it. Then I know I'm going to be able to do an episode and not have to, force my way through it and figure out something to talk about, because frankly, I don't want to do that. And that's the kind of stuff that listeners don't want to listen to, because they can tell you don't care. And so I'm right. Everyone kind of applauds me for, working my way through the Supreme Court cases, because most people don't want to do that, because Supreme Court cases can be really boring. But, and from time to time, I don't want to sit down and read case law and stuff like that either. But, every once in a while, I'll have, something will pop up in the news or something, and I'll think, oh man, that really connects to that court case. And then I go back and I'm like, yeah, let me look through my notes in that court case again. And then I get really excited about the case. And I'm like, okay, let's do an episode on it. So I really try to do whatever I'm enthusiastic about or interested about.
Tell us about something like a recent episode you did you really enjoyed that you think fans would or listeners would really get a kick out of or learn a lot from.
I would probably say actually one of the Supreme Court cases, I would say probably start with the DC v. Heller episode. I'm pretty sure that was our first Supreme Court case that I did. And that was one of our most, I think that was maybe my most popular episode to date that didn't have a guest, that it was just me talking about whatever. And it really is interesting. I think, right, as I said earlier, a lot of people hear Supreme Court cases and they think, oh gosh, that's so boring. But I really go through and I boil it all down really simply, so it doesn't feel like you're, drudging your way through a court case. But that one was really interesting because it got into a lot of different facets of firearm law, and I also kind of threw in, well, here's how here's how DC tried to argue their case. So you kind of get where the left's coming from too. And really, I just think it's important that we know this stuff because, I say this all the time on my show, but, anyone can shout slogans, right? Like we on the right can say, guns don't kill people, people kill people. And that's true. That's logically true. Like you can't get around that. But at the same time, that's not really going to change too many minds. And you're not really engaging in a, really good conversation at that point. You're just kind of throwing your slogans, and the left is going to come out and throw their stupid slogans. And so it's like, well, maybe if we get a little more educated, maybe if we know a little more, you can bring up and say, well, hey, look, here's the District of Columbia that said you can't even own a pistol in your home, right? And we had a very narrow ruling in that case. Right. It was 5-4. Right. So roughly half of the Supreme Court felt like you couldn't even own a pistol in your home. Like if you can't own a pistol in your home, then everything else is got. We can't even talk about rifles or talk about concealed carry out in the public. I mean, that's as far as it goes. After that, there's nothing left. If you can't have a pistol stored in your house, that you can't. There's nothing. So basically, DC v. Heller was, do you have a Second Amendment right? It really was, and it was a close case. So if that's something that sounds interesting to you, you can go ahead and check that out. I can't remember what number that was, but I always title them. It'll say DC v. Heller. So
we will put a link in the show notes for that episode as well. How do you see things going with Brett Kavanaugh? And do you think that he's going to be good for gun rights? Was he a good choice? I had Remzo Martinez on recently, and he hated the pick. What are your thoughts on Kavanaugh?
Yeah, I don't know. It's really hard to say. His record is decent, and I know he's obviously backed by. He had the support of the NRA, but I don't know. I think we'll see. I think it's really, really hard to tell because we've seen with some judges, they'll have a certain record, and then once they get in the Supreme Court, who knows? Sometimes it can go crazy in one direction, or they can stay consistent with their voting record and what we've seen before they got there. So I don't know. I mean, obviously, I'm optimistic. I really hope that it ends up being a really good pick.
I guess that's the hope, and that's I guess that, and the fact that we have another Supreme Court vacancy now is, I guess, in a lot of ways, the reason that many people voted for Trump, even though they weren't all that crazy about him personally. They knew that 1, 2, maybe 3 openings on the Supreme Court in the next 4 years in the hands of Hillary Clinton would be devastating for liberty.
For sure. I mean, if you really think about it, the president can have, especially nowadays with the office growing more and more powerful, the president can have an impact on the economy and on the greater scheme of things, but, not as much as we really think. But the Supreme Court can have a drastic impact on how things go. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people during the 2016 election saw how old the Supreme Court justices were getting, and they said, man, there's going to be probably a couple seats opening up, especially if we're thinking, longer term, or if we're thinking an 8-year term, whoever won the 2016 would get elected again. I mean, they were expecting at least one seat, probably two. That's how it's worked out. And, obviously, especially being a Christian, a lot of things about Trump's demeanor and the way that he approaches certain things. I don't really much care for the guy personally, but, everyone knew that if you're voting on the right, everyone knew that you were choosing between your principles, whether or not you liked this guy, whether or not he thought he was worthy of leading the country. And but think about the greater good, because, you got the Supreme Court, you've got who knows what's going to come down the pipe with Hillary in addition to the Supreme Court. So, yeah, I had Ken Sherb on the show before the election, and we talked about the Christian view of voting, and that the way we should look at it is not, am I voting for this person? Am I voting for this candidate? The proper way to look at it is you're voting for your neighbor, right? We're commanded to love our neighbor and to care for our neighbor, to protect our neighbors. Well, what happens to our neighbor and their property and their taxes, their ability to defend themselves? What happens to the rights of the unborn if a certain candidate wins? Yes, this one person is personally, morally repugnant, but what are the likely effects of his policies on our neighbors? And that was the overriding factor for me in deciding to vote for Trump. Yeah, and I'm sure that's what the vast majority of, especially conservative Christians out there, have felt. I know I wrestled with it for a while, because there was that part of the right wing that said, oh yeah, but we just can't get past, his demeanor and how he talks to some people and just how he acts. And I feel like if you're waiting to cast your vote for a solid Christian, then you're probably not going to be voting for a long time. Right. So, it really does come down to, who's going to be best, or, I hate thinking about it this way, but who's going to be the lesser of two evils. So. Yeah. Unfortunately, too often, unfortunately, that's kind of the choice we end up with, because the people who seem to have the strongest conservative credentials don't seem to make it to the finish line. And we get some compromise candidate at the end. And it's, well, do we vote for him, or do we vote? We can't vote for the other because the other is horrible, and we know what we're going to get with that. So I guess we got to vote for this other person. And that is getting really old. But like you said, if we're going to wait for the perfect candidate, we'll never be voting. Right. It's already on a 4-year cycle. So it would be quite a while. As a student of history, there is something I heard the other day that struck me rather odd. We were just talking about looking back at the founders and their view of things, and the left's current obsession with trying to undermine the Second Amendment because it's outdated and that sort of thing. But just this, I think it was last week or maybe the week before, the New York Times actually ran an article that suggested that we needed to get rid of the Constitution altogether and start over because it's outdated. This was the New York Times? The New York Times. Oh, wow. Yeah. That the argument that they made, in fact, I think the title of the article was, "If you're waiting for the Constitution to save us, think again." So the Constitution isn't going to get the left out of, get the left the things that they want. So essentially, we need to scrap the Constitution and start over. Well, I mean, that whole free speech and Second Amendment thing can be quite inconvenient for the left. Right. Yeah, I mean, that's, it goes without saying, that's total baloney. And it's so interesting. Wow, New York Times. I'll tell you what, it's so interesting how the left's true colors are coming out. I'm not even that old, and I remember a time when that being said, would be total taboo. It was total taboo. You wouldn't say, repeal the Second Amendment. You wouldn't say scrap the Constitution. And this was less than a decade ago. And it is just crazy that we've come that far. Man.
The left has become so disconnected from reality, so unhinged because of Trump, that they're now talking, and they're openly talking about, amending the Constitution or getting rid of the Constitution, or, suggesting violence against people that they disagree with politically. And yeah, I think we're in a place in this country where I don't, in my 49 years, I don't think we've ever been, even during the 60s and early 70s, when this country was, in a mess because of Vietnam and race relations. I don't think we've ever been where we are right now.
Yeah, I just feel like I'm trying to think of a time in American history, even when we've been most divided, the Constitution is what's always held us together. Even if you look at anything, even if you look at the Civil War, arguably the most divided we've ever been, brother killing brother. The Constitution and the rights of slaves and the rights of all men is what was being fought over. And it's been the Constitution that's kept the country together and kept the country going. And it's what's always united us. I mean, if you look at left-wing politics, if you look at the Democratic Party from back in the 20th century, and you got, the Democratic Party of Kennedy, it's vastly different from the left now. Those classical liberals, they still believed in freedom of speech. They still believed in the Constitution. But nowadays, I mean, my gosh, there is just, I don't know if it just stems from historical ignorance. I'm not sure where, right? I think, like you said, I think Trump, what they're calling now Trump derangement syndrome, I think that has a lot to do with it as well. But it's been, I would even say these last 5 years, especially starting in like 2015, even a year before Trump took office, things have just gotten absolutely crazy. And I just can't, like I said, there's a lot of factors, but I just can't really explain it. I don't know.
I've been thinking about this too. And I think it goes back to, it really starts with Clinton. Because if you remember, and let's see, how old are you? I keep forgetting that I'm kind of the old guy.
I am. Let me think about it for a second. I should know because I'm in my 20s. I believe I'm 24. After 22, it started just kind of being unimportant, and I've already forgotten. So I feel like I'm someone, it's like in my 60s or 70s. I'm like, how old am I again? I don't know. I'm already at that stage, and I'm in my 20s. But yeah, I think
okay.
I'm
So you would have
been born in 93.
Okay, so there's no way you would have remembered this. But the Clintons changed politics in a way that I think we're seeing the end result of. There was a time when Reagan was president where you could disagree with each other on the floor of the House or the floor of the Senate, and then you could go out and have a drink. Where Tip O'Neill would say, would talk about President Reagan and how dangerous he was, and then go out and have a drink with him after.
Yeah.
But the Clintons came along and changed things to where you started demonizing not the person's policies, but the person himself. And I think that's where we find ourselves now, that when you've demonized the other side to such a point that their policies aren't just wrong, that the person behind the policy is evil, you can't have a discussion with them anymore. And so all this talk on the left about how we need to have a discussion about race, or we need to have a discussion about poverty, or we need to have a discussion about climate, or we need to have a discussion about guns, we can't have those discussions because the left is busy making us out to be the worst people on the face of the earth. And who can talk to that kind of a person? You can't have how dare you discuss or, sit down and talk to somebody who you've spent all this time making out to be evil.
Right. You kind of, when you do that, when you're someone on the left that's, painting the other side as, right, the definition of evil, you're calling them Nazis, you're calling them racists, you're actually kind of boxing yourself in, because then if you decide to have a change of heart, if you decide, man, I guess I'm going to go have a conversation with this person. Well, now you're talking to Mr. Racist over here or Mrs. Nazi over here. And now you're associating with people that you just got done calling,
right,
who knows what. And yeah, I think you're definitely right.
Yep.
The party polarization has just been insane since, right? I would say since the 90s, since the Clintons, which is really interesting that you've brought that up. And I think I don't know. I don't see it really getting any better. It would be interesting to see how things change after Trump leaves office, whether that be this upcoming election or if he has 2 terms after his second term. But I don't know. I almost feel like some of the cultural damage is done. It's really hard to go the other way. I feel like it's really hard to go back to a point of conversation once you've taken it so far, and once a whole generation has been raised on, oh, right wingers are all Nazis.
Yeah. When you've got people who are willing to openly say we need to kill the president, we need to kill Trump, I saw a video the other day of, I think it was kids in Portland, and one of them had a poster that basically said kill Trump,
right.
Kill Pence. And I'm sitting here thinking, how are we ever going to bridge that divide if when at this age these young people want to kill somebody because they disagree with them politically?
And it's so tough too, especially as Christians. We know that one of the biggest problems with humanity is pride, and it's the same thing that we were talking about earlier. When I was raised ELCA, I got to college and switched to LCMS, and I said, "Oh man, like that's so hard for me. Everything I've known has been ELCA. It's so hard for me to admit that everything that I had been believing, not necessarily everything, but most of the stuff that I've been believing has just been a total lie, and I've been gypped my whole life. And it took me ignoring and beating down my pride to say, no, like I need to kind of disown that. I need to figure out what I believe. It's the same thing with these kids. I mean, they're raised, calling the NRA child murderers, calling, Trump a Nazi, saying we need to murder Trump, when they're 20 or however long it takes, when they're in their 30s and they are at this point where it's like, okay,
right.
Do we kind of accept the fact that was wrong and maybe try to have a decent conversation with someone on the other side? It's going to take a lot of swallowing of their pride in order to kind of reverse that and admit that, hey, maybe calling for the murder of the president of the United States was the best thing. Like, it's just going to be really interesting to see how a whole generation raised on this, I don't know what else to call it, filth, and just I don't know. I don't know what kind of effect it's going to have long term, but I can't imagine it's going to be good.
So what's so for those who want to find out more about you and about the podcast, where do they go? How do they find out?
Well, one of the easiest things to do is to go to AmericanGunsPodcast.com. I got a lot of stuff up on that website. Again, that debate section I referenced earlier. I got a little bit about me. I've got a whole page with all of the guests that I've had on my show, so you can read just a really brief few bullet points about each guest, and then if someone sounds really interesting to you, that you can go back and listen to that episode. Other than that, I mean, you can just find the podcast pretty much anywhere where you would find a podcast. I'm on all the major platforms, obviously iTunes. I know a big one for Android is Player FM. That's what I really enjoy using for Android. It's a great podcast app. It's totally free. Not sponsored by them in any way, but it's just AmericanGunsPodcast.com, and then whether you use iTunes or whatever, you can find the show.
And of course, you can check them out at the Self-Defense Radio Network's website. SDRN.us is the new address. Check that out. Matt Disher is the host of the American Guns podcast, a proud member of the Self-Defense Radio Network, and I am proud to have been on his show and proud to call you a friend. Matt, thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Lloyd. Thanks for taking the time. It's been really good.
And that's going to wrap it up for this week's show. Thank you all for listening, for downloading, for subscribing. Thank you to our fine sponsors who make all this possible. Thank you to my awesome cast of contributors. And thank you, dear listener, for listening, for downloading, for subscribing. I hope you'll join us again next week. Until then, keep shooting, keep praying. We'll talk to you next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Armed Lutheran Radio. For show notes, be sure to visit our website at www.armedlutheran.us. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, and TuneIn. This podcast is made possible by Cooke's Holsters and contributions from listeners like you.